Hi, I want to speak briefly today about the 6 steps to leading a successful life. What are these 6 simple steps which you can follow, which will help you deal with any situation creatively, proactively, and productively? It's very easy to talk about 6 steps of this and 5 steps of that and 4 ways to do the other thing. But what does this really mean, and what can we do in our daily life which will really help us, okay? So here are 6 simple steps which will help you in any situation you find yourself in, and particularly in today's society with the coronavirus doing the rounds, and in general the dynamic life situations we're finding ourselves in, the modern job market, modern socio-economic, political situations we're finding ourselves in. So the first thing that we need to do to thrive and survive is a growth mindset. A growth mindset basically means that we are flexible rather than rigid. You see, there's 2 ways you can deal with change. One way you can deal with change is to run the other way and be upset and scared, or maybe resistant, not on my watch. You're going to pry it out of my cold, dead fingers, all that sort of approach. And the other approach is to be dynamic and to be versatile, to work with the situation as it presents itself and adapt to the situation. So this is what a growth mindset is about. The growth mindset is seeing each challenge as a potential opportunity and perhaps also thinking strategically rather than butting things head on. We adapt to the situation. If I give an example from my own life, or rather my father's life, my father was always a very active member of the union. Back when he was a young guy, unions were a big deal. And the unions helped get things like a 5-day working week instead of a 6-day week. And the unions helped get things like sick pay and all these sort of really good benefits, holiday pay, which back in the 1940s when my father started working were simply not available. But I do remember back in the 1980s, the company he was working for was having a difficult time, and they went into receivership. And there's one guy he used to, a friend of his he used to hang around with, a work colleague. And that guy was always butting heads. And my father, he could butt heads too. But in this situation, he realized it was 1980s, it was very hard to get a job in the 1980s. And he had a wife who was a housewife, that hadn't worked since she was probably in her early 20s. And he had 4 young kids, a few teenagers, a couple of smaller kids. And he decided to keep his mouth shut. And his friend decided not to keep his mouth shut. Needless to say, his friend was laid off. And I don't know what happened in his work situation later, but it was a tough time in the 1980s. If, like my dad in the 1980s was probably around 50 years of age, in his 50s, it'd be tough to get a job in your 50s, especially in that economic environment. And he did all sorts of other funny things. Some was very funny. He had a company car, or rather he had a car, but he gave money to pay for the car. And they wanted to track him down and see what he was doing. So they put a phone in the car, and then he would sit in the driveway, and he would read a book. And if they called him, he talked to them on the phone. He did all sorts of funny shenanigans. And you might think, was he cheating or was he up to something? He wasn't really. Basically, the challenge my father had was he had angina, which is a heart condition. And he would tire by 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He was very tired. So what he used to do is he'd get up at 5 in the morning. He was an early riser, and he would leave for work just after 7. We would be dropped into school at like 7:20, 7:30, something like that. And their school didn't start till 8:45, so we're just like wandering around the campus for like over an hour. But he'd be the first to get into work. He was always he'd get an award for being the first one to work every day, and he would get an award once a year for that. But he used to get in very early and get his work done and get out and see the clients that he had to see. And he would come home at 1 o'clock or 1:30, have lunch, and then in the living room he would take out some charts and stuff, because he worked in a gas company, he had to do stuff with piping and all this sort of thing. And he would call various contractors, people like that, to see that they were doing things the right way they should be if you want to get a connection. And his work was done by 3 o'clock or 3:30. And he did a day's work, his work was done. But he would start maybe an hour before everybody else, and he was quick at doing his job, and he would get stuck in and get it done. And this was his way of coping with ill health, because at 3:30 he'd hit the sack and he would sleep till like 4:30, 5, 5:30, because his health just wasn't that good. So if he was to do things exactly, strictly, turn up to work at 9 o'clock, leave work at 5:30, he'd probably been retired by the year. He'd be on sick duty, okay? They would have kicked him out. But he adapted. He had a growth mindset. So that's what we're talking about, growth mindset, is adapting to situations. So my dad was very good. He kept his head down when he had to. He kept his head up when he had to as well. He had to spoke when he had to speak. And he could adapt to funny situations and make a job his own, which was necessary considering himself. So that's a growth mindset. It's not just about learning new things. This is part of what growth mindset is, learning new things, being open to new things. But growth mindset is also being strategic, because we have a tendency of butting things head on. And with growth mindset, it's having a different approach and finding more adaptable ways of dealing with situations, because there's not many situations in life that you have to face head on, okay? A second one, which is very useful, is emotional quotient. And you probably hear this one bandied around, emotional quotient. And emotional quotient basically means having empathy for the people. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy being that you feel sorry for somebody, and empathy that you can feel the other person. And it actually goes two ways. We tend to think of somebody with a high emotional quotient, like EQ, as somebody who can work with other people, knows how to talk to people, and can get work done with other people. And this is very, very true of emotional quotient. And it will help you with success in life, because you can work with people. There's a famous book was called, I think it was Norman Vincent Peale, was it? Maybe How to Make Friends and Influence People. Or maybe it was Dale Carnegie. I'm not sure, but How to Make Friends and Influence People. The point is that it's very useful to seek first to understand, get to know the other person, see where they're at and what they want. So ask them how their day is before you tell them how your day is. So this sort of emotional intelligence means that you know how to play people. Again, you can see on the manipulative side. And the manipulative side is knowing how to deal with people, how to talk to people to get what you want, which sounds sophistic, as in, you're trying to get something for yourself. But it's also just a reasonable way of doing business. And, people are sensitive, and they get, it's easy to stand on people's toes. And a lot of good people, not bad people, but good people stand on other people's toes because they're insensitive. But there's also a second side to emotional quotient. And the second side to emotional quotient is knowing your own feelings, understanding your own motivations, because often we are more emotional than we realize. And we often force ourselves into all sorts of situations. There was a time in my life when I trained in Chinese medicine. I used to run a practice for a few years. And what I found very interesting about was the number of people I met who did not respect themselves. And what I mean in the sense that they treated themselves like an automaton. They treated themselves like a machine to be squeezed and pushed. And you are not a machine. I can drive my car all day. My red line on my car is 6,000 RPM. And as far as I'm aware, once I warm up the engine, I could probably drive that car all day for hundreds and hundreds of miles at 5,800, 5,900 RPM. As long as I keep it under red line, I can drive all day. Now, it might wear out a little bit quicker, but it will basically drive without breaking down because it's below the red line. But human beings are not so discrete, as in one's over here and one's there. You try and drive just under your red line for more than a month or two, and you'll find that your red line will drop. And this is where we're different from machines. Our red line will actually go the other way, and we'll actually start burning out faster. We can only push for so long and so hard. And that's probably the biggest thing I saw why people get ill, is pushing themselves so hard. I can leave my computer on all day. I can leave my phone on. Should we leave our phone on for days and weeks? We can't leave our cell phone for days and weeks. So emotional intelligence is knowing how to work with other people, but emotional intelligence is more importantly knowing how to work with yourself, how hard to push, and also knowing when to push yourself and finding out how to push your own buttons. That's also emotional intelligence. Third factor, which would be very good, is mental toughness. Mental toughness is really, they had this when I was a kid. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. We're always reading the Bible stories. I always remember the Bible is they're always talking about, gird up your loins, which basically means protect your testicles or your genitals, genital region, whether you're male or female. Protect that genital region. And the whole idea is like, get ready for battle. Okay, it's a funny saying, gird up your loins. But yeah, get yourself ready. And there's too many snowflakes. Nothing wrong with being a snowflake, but You can't be a snowflake all the time. And so we need to have certain mental toughness and develop things like patience and develop things like perseverance. And, you know, the last video I did, I talked about the power of intent. And the power of intent says, I am doing something and nobody is stopping me. And that is the power of intent. Not I'm doing something until it gets a little bit hard and I'm going to give up. Okay? So mental toughness, working on that. And if you think you're not very mentally tough, it's something you can improve over time. Okay? Over time, you can become more mentally tough. All right? It's a capacity. It's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and you haven't done crunches before, like these ab exercises, maybe you're going to do 10. But after the first week, you can do 20. After a month, you can do 50. After 6 months, you can do 10 sets of 100. Okay, so we build a capacity to have mental toughness. We don't necessarily develop it overnight, but something we work towards, right? Another factor which is very useful is willpower. Develop your willpower. And I think will is very interesting and something I'll have to do a video on at some stage, because there's actually many types of willpower, you know. And like one aspect of willpower is forcing yourself to do something. So like I was watching not so long ago, some guy did this he held the plank. You know, the plank is where you're in this kind of position like this. He held the plank for like 8 hours or something. And it's just nuts. I mean, if you try the plank, you'll be extremely uncomfortable after about 30 seconds. I mean, I think if you can hold a plank for 2 or 3 minutes, it's a big deal. To hold a plank for, I don't know, several hours or 8 hours or something is crazy. This is like sheer willpower. But there's also another softer aspect of willpower which people don't think about, which is the will to power, to decide on something. This gets back to the power of intent. Willpower can sometimes be this fierce intention, this fierce concentration that I'm going to do something, like I'm going to stay in this pose for 8 hours or something. That's one form of willpower. But the more subtle form of willpower is willing to power, choosing to do something and not giving in. And of course, remember, growth mindset is also important, that we're not stubborn, like a stubborn old goat. We shouldn't be like that, sort of stubborn. But having this will to power, to empower myself, to apply my will, to have a vision of what I want to achieve in life, and to apply my will in my life to achieve certain goals. This is willpower in the sense of will to power, will to empower myself, will to empower other people, okay? Great example of this would be Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, of course, for anybody who knows about Indian history, he was the great master politician who united everybody towards gaining Indian independence. And he was a guy who clearly had will to power. He did a lot of this non-violent stuff. And, you know, the will to power to say, you know, they can only hit us so many times. And it's easy to say that, but to actually go and do that repeatedly, they can only hit us so many times. They can only stick so many of us in prison. They can only kill so many of us. And to believe it and act on it. That's the will to power. And nothing can overcome that. Getting into our life, the will to power, is finding out what we want to do and learning to sustain it longer and longer. Not necessarily the kind of trembling, hold on myself into a stiff position for a long time kind of willpower, which sometimes is necessary, but the will to power, to know what I want, to apply myself, and to keep going, having that persistence and that patience. And another thing which is very, very useful is, so these are two very strong things, which is mental toughness and strengthening the willpower. And then we have the softer side of things, which is motivators, because we have to have the will to power ourselves, but we also have to motivate ourselves. And I think this is a very important thing in self-motivation, is learning to stoke that flame. You know, if you've ever lit a fire in a house, and I was not raised in a house with a fire, we had electric fires and stuff. And on occasion I've been in the house that has a fire. It always amazed me that getting the fire going takes a bit of work. But once the fire is going, you throw in a little bit of wood, a little bit of peat, a little bit of kind of firelighter stuff, a little bit of coal. To keep the fire going is not that hard. Starting the fire is hard. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make with motivation is they start very well and then they derail themselves very quickly, because it becomes uncomfortable quickly, because you start off with all these high ideals and very quickly you meet resistance and very quickly you give in to resistance and then you give up. But it's getting that sustainability. I don't mean like environmental sustainability, I mean the sustainability in yourself, that you keep coaxing that fire. So you don't have to light the fire, let the fire go out, light a fire, let the fire go out. You light it and you sustain it, because it takes a lot to start something, but then to maintain something a little bit here, a little bit there, and keep that fire going. And that's where motivating is very important. I like to call it mind feed. Mind feed, basically reading good books, watching good videos, hanging around good people, pruning things in your life that are holding you back. Maybe the location where you live is not a very conducive place, or is very negative. Well, change your location. Maybe a lot of people in your life are not very conducive. Well, change those people. Maybe your job's not very conducive. Drop your job. I know this sounds harsh, but I'm just saying, it's how am I motivating myself? Who am I surrounding myself with? And I'm not saying you should be ruthless about this, but we should become aware of how am I motivating myself and make sure I'm giving myself that nutriment. And it's a very interesting thing that, I go to the gym, I see so many people, they're taking all the shakes, pre-workouts, spending so much money on all this stuff for their body, and your body's temple, but they're not doing anything for their mind, for the emotions, for the soul, everything else. That's all in some corner, some little skeleton within the self, anorexic mental body, anorexic emotional body, anorexic spiritual body, physical body strapping, okay? I like a strapping body, but you need to work on the inner as well. And so you need to motivate and find out what, turns you on and use that, because it's far easier to pull yourself with your imagination than it is to push yourself, by beating yourself over the head. Talking of gymming, look at all those nice motivation videos you get on YouTube, and they'll have people training and the cool music and stuff. Why do we like that? There's a logic to it. The logic to that is it gets us in the mood. So getting yourself in the mood is easier than forcing yourself to do something. And that's where motivating is very, very important. And the final point I come across here, which will be self-nurturing, the power of nurturing yourself. And that sounds like a wishy-washy thing, but here's a very simple one. For example, when I was a kid growing up, a lot of people used to drink a hot chocolate before going to bed. Now, I never drank hot chocolate. Me and my family, we never took hot chocolate. I don't know why, we just didn't do it. But I know a lot of people over the years who have. If we look at, say, a hot chocolate before going to bed, that's a nurturing thing. It's a lovely hot drink before going to bed. My mother used to make a very nice stew. We had brown stew, we had what's called white stew. Brown stew is more like potatoes and stuff and brown in colour. White stew is more like light brown colour and sausages and stuff. But on the winter's day, it was nothing as nice as coming home and having a nice bowl of stew. It just heated you up from the inside. Porridge is another one that's nice for heating up. Coming into the evening and sitting in a nice big chair by the fire and watching a nice movie or something with some good company, somebody to snuggle up to perhaps, it's nurturing, isn't it? But there's more ways than that. Another way of nurturing is reading a good book, going for a walk, watching a good movie. Another good way of nurturing is accepting. I'm reading about, there's many articles and books you can read, or videos you can watch about the power of acceptance, because a lot of people getting back to that automaton thing. There's two ways of looking at the automaton. One way is, are you just like an automaton, like this machine life? But the other thing is, you're not an automaton, but you're behaving like you're an automaton, as in you're pushing yourself. Just like I say in that red line in the car too much. So self-nurturing is also becoming aware, how hard can I push myself? How much sleep do I need? How much variety do I need? Do I need to maybe not go out tonight and not party? Do I need to crash and relax and take it easy? Do I need to go off for a few days? Or do me and my family need to go off for a few days? Do we need to touch base with our family members? Do we need to relax? Do we need some meditation, some spirituality? So self-nurturing is like playing the long game. There's a short game and a longer game. The short game is short hits that you need in life. And then the long game is the bigger perspective. And self-nurturement is more the bigger perspective. Okay, just like you might need to achieve a goal this weekend, and you're going to use your willpower, not your will to power, which is raw willpower to push yourself. But in the longer game, if you have goals to achieve in life, they're going to take months and years to achieve. And for this, you need to be peaceful and happy with what you're doing and nurturing yourself. And you know, the more, what I often talk about is like being in congruence. So we got an inner side, inner heart's desires, embedded into us by our soul. And the more, the problem people have, they're not congruent to what's inside. The more you get congruent, the easier it is. And a lot of people are forcing themselves to live a life you don't really like living. And you need to live that life. And the more congruent you get, the more work and play are one as an extension of the other. And yeah, sometimes there are days or weeks even where you have to work really hard. But the more you get into this, and part of this is self-nurture, is that your work is an extension of your play, and your play is an extension of your work. And therefore work is play and play is work, and it's more integrated, which is the way we're meant to really be. Because going back to ancient human beings, before the Industrial Revolution, this is how life was. It was a mix. It wasn't like I have to go and stick myself into the factory for 12 hours or stick myself into the office and log myself in for 9 hours or something like that. People sometimes worked hard and sometimes they didn't. That was a natural flow. So self-nurturing is also very important. So in summary, if we look at those, we have a growth mindset, boosting emotional EQ, mental toughness, strengthening the will, motivating ourselves, and self-nurture. They are 6 simple steps that you can apply today, which will really, really help. And like everything I say in these videos, it can take time to integrate these things, but these are 6 simple things which you can do. And maybe you're doing some of them and maybe you're not doing others. Have a look, have a think about. Because the trick to having a successful life, no matter what's happening around you, is using these approaches to boosting our adaptability, our inner strength, and our self-nurturing, that we're working on both an inner balance, an inner groundedness, while also being very outwardly competent, okay? So there's 6 steps that will definitely help you lead a more successful and happier life. I hope you liked this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.